My name is Alice. I'm 58 years old, and I never thought my own daughter would try to steal my life savings. For 30 years, I worked as a nurse, saving lives and saving money after my husband died. Stephanie and I were close once, especially when her son Noah was born 4 years ago. But when I refused to pay $60,000 for her wedding, everything changed. What was supposed to be a reconciliation dinner turned into an ambush with lawyers. If you're watching this, share where you're from and hit subscribe because you'll want to hear how I turned the tables when my own daughter tried to take everything I had. I grew up in a modest middle-class family in Michigan, where I learned early on that hard work and honesty were the foundation of a good life. My parents weren't wealthy, but they provided everything we needed, and they taught me the value of saving for what matters. Those lessons stayed with me as I grew up and became a nurse. I met my husband Frank when we were both 23. He worked as a mechanical engineer at a local manufacturing company. We fell in love quickly and deeply. When we got married, we had a simple ceremony in my parents' backyard with just 50 guests. We didn't need anything extravagant to celebrate our love. The whole wedding cost less than $3,000, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. Frank and I built our life together carefully. We bought a small 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, saved diligently, and planned for our future. When I got pregnant with Stephanie, we were overjoyed. She was born on a beautiful spring morning, and from the moment I held her, I knew I would do anything for my daughter. Stephanie and I had a special bond from the beginning. She was a bright, curious child with her father's analytical mind and my compassion. We spent countless hours reading together, baking cookies, and talking about her dreams. Frank adored her too, teaching her how to ride a bike, build science projects, and fix things around the house. We were a tight-knit family, not wealthy, but happy and secure. Everything changed when Stephanie turned 15. Frank started feeling unusually tired and lost weight rapidly. After several tests, we received the devastating diagnosis stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him less than a year to live. I still remember Stephanie's face when we told her, confusion, then disbelief, then pure heartbreak. The next year was brutal. Frank underwent aggressive treatments that drained our savings and my energy. I reduced my nursing hours to care for him while trying to be there for Stephanie as she navigated her teenage years with a dying father. The medical bills piled up despite our insurance. Frank had a life insurance policy, but it wouldn't be enough for long-term security. After 11 months of fighting, Frank passed away with Stephanie and me by his side. She was 17, about to start her senior year of high school. I was 43, and suddenly a widow with a grieving teenager and mounting financial concerns. To keep our home and provide for Stephanie, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. Some weeks I worked 70 hours, coming home exhausted, but determined to give my daughter the future her father would have wanted for her. Those years were a blur of hospital corridors, quick meals, and stolen moments with Stephanie. Despite our financial strain, I was adamant about paying for Stephanie's college education. Frank and I had started a college fund when she was born, but it wasn't enough after his medical expenses. Still, I wanted her to graduate debt-free. When she got accepted to a good state university, I took out a small loan and worked even more hours to make it happen. During college, I noticed subtle changes in Stephanie. She joined a sorority and began spending time with students from wealthier backgrounds. Her clothing became more expensive, her tastes more refined. When she came home for breaks, she'd comment on how small our house was, or suggest upgrades we couldn't afford. I chalked it up to her expanding horizons and tried not to take it personally. In her junior year, Stephanie met Thomas, a business major from an affluent family in Connecticut. His father owned a successful investment firm, and his mother came from old money. When Stephanie first brought him home, I noticed how he surveyed our modest living room with barely concealed judgment. But he was polite enough, and Stephanie was clearly smitten. After graduation, Stephanie took a marketing job at a prestigious firm where Thomas's connections had helped her get an interview. Her salary was good, but her lifestyle quickly expanded beyond her means. She moved into an expensive apartment with Thomas bought designer clothes and took lavish vacations she couldn't really afford. Whenever I expressed concern about her spending, she'd dismiss me, saying I didn't understand modern careers or that certain expenses were investments in her future. By this time, I was approaching retirement age. After 30 years of nursing, my body was feeling the strain of the long hours and physical demands. I had managed to rebuild our savings somewhat after Frank's death, putting away enough for a modest but comfortable retirement. Nothing extravagant, but enough that I wouldn't be a burden on Stephanie in my later years. When Stephanie announced she was pregnant at 28, I was ecstatic. Despite our growing differences, the thought of becoming a grandmother filled me with joy. Noah was born healthy and perfect, with Stephanie's blonde hair and Thomas's blue eyes. The first time I held him, all the tensions between Stephanie and me seemed to fade away. I offered to help with childcare whenever possible, driving 40 minutes each way to their apartment several times a week. I treasured those days with Noah singing him the same lullabies I had sung to his mother, watching his personality emerge. Stephanie seemed grateful for the help, though she often critiqued my childcare methods or dismissed my experienced advice. As Noah grew from infant to toddler, Stephanie increasingly expected financial support from me as well. It started with small things, expensive baby gear she insisted was necessary childcare costs when I couldn't be there, contributions to Noah's private preschool tuition. I helped where I could, but sometimes had to say no. Each refusal seemed to create a new crack in our relationship. The wedding drama began when Stephanie called me screaming with excitement. Thomas had proposed during their vacation in Santorini with a diamond ring that must have cost at least $15,000. I was happy for her, truly. All I ever wanted was for my daughter to find love like I had with Frank. "We're thinking about a spring wedding next year," Stephanie told me during our first wedding discussion. "Nothing too elaborate, maybe 75 guests at that lovely botanical garden downtown." That sounded reasonable to me. I mentally calculated what I could contribute and thought I could manage about $10,000 without straining my retirement savings too much. The engagement dinner with Thomas's parents was my first clue that things might get complicated. Gerald and Patricia Wilson hosted at an exclusive country club where Gerald was a board member. They ordered $500 bottles of wine like it was nothing and spoke casually about their multiple homes. Throughout dinner, they made subtle comments about giving the couple the wedding they deserve and starting married life on the right foot, with pointed glances in my direction. 2 weeks after that dinner, Stephanie's wedding vision underwent a dramatic transformation. Suddenly, she was talking about a destination wedding in Napa Valley, with 200 guests, a designer gown, and a weekend of events, including a spa day for the bridal party and a golf tournament for the groomsmen. "Mum, we need to discuss the budget," Stephanie said one afternoon, spreading a professional-looking presentation across my kitchen table. Thomas sat beside her, his expression unreadable. I nearly choked on my tea when I saw the bottom line: $120,000. The breakdown included $40,000 for the venue, $20,000 for catering, $15,000 for photography and videography, $12,000 for flowers, and on, with increasingly extravagant details. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "this is quite elaborate. I thought you wanted something simpler." Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "That was before we really started planning. This is standard for a nice wedding these days." "Standard for who?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. "This is more than twice what our house cost when your father and I bought it." Thomas cleared his throat. "My parents are contributing $60,000, he said, as if that settled everything. Stephanie fixed her eyes on me. "So we need you to match that, Mum," $60,000 from each side of the family. The room seemed to tilt. $60,000 was more than a third of my entire retirement savings. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. Stephanie, I don't have that kind of money to spend on a one-day event, I explained. I can contribute $15,000, which is still a significant amount for me. Her face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. That's it. 15,000. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Thomas's parents are giving 4 times that amount. Thomas's parents have different financial circumstances, I said. I'm trying to be responsible with my retirement savings. You're just being selfish, Stephanie snapped. You've always been cheap. This is the most important day of my life. Thomas interjected. My parents said they could cover more if necessary, but Stephanie feels it's important that both families contribute equally. I felt a flash of irritation at his presumption. I understand this is important, but my contribution needs to be based on my financial reality, not your parents' expectations. Fine, Stephanie said coldly. Give whatever pittance you think is appropriate. Just know you're ruining my dream wedding. Over the next few weeks, the situation deteriorated further. Stephanie invited me to planning meetings only to dismiss my every suggestion as too budget or not sophisticated enough. When I expressed concern about flying elderly relatives to California for a destination wedding, she accused me of trying to drag everyone down to my level. During a cake tasting, when I suggested a smaller, elegant design, rather than the 7-tier monstrosity she wanted, Stephanie turned to the baker and said, "Please excuse my mother. She doesn't understand quality." The final breaking point came 3 months before the wedding. Stephanie called demanding that I increase my contribution to at least $30,000. Thomas's parents are now putting in $75,000, she said. The least you could do is match half of that. I've already explained my situation, Stephanie. 15,000 is what I can responsibly give. Then don't bother coming to the wedding, she hissed before hanging up. I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. How had my sweet little girl turned into someone who valued money over her own mother's presence at her wedding? After a sleepless night, I called her back and said I would still attend. Still give my $15,000 as a gift and still help however I could. She replied with a terse whatever that broke my heart all over again. After our argument about the wedding budget, Stephanie's demeanor toward me chilled dramatically. Where once we spoke several times a week, now my calls went straight to voicemail. My texts received one-word responses, if any. Most painfully, my time with Noah was suddenly inconvenient or needed to be rescheduled repeatedly. I tried reaching out in different ways. I sent handwritten cards expressing my love and support. I dropped off Noah's favorite cookies at their apartment when I knew Stephanie would be at work, leaving them with a kind note. I even asked Stephanie's childhood friend Julia to intercede, but apparently Stephanie told her I was trying to ruin the biggest day of her life. Meanwhile, wedding planning continued without me. Occasionally, I'd receive terse emails with information about when to arrive for the rehearsal dinner or what color I should wear as mother of the bride. These communications were clearly sent out of obligation rather than any desire to include me. Despite it all, I maintained my financial boundary. The $15,000 I had promised remained in a separate account, ready to give as a gift. But I would not drain my retirement security for a single day of extravagance. As the wedding day approached, I received a formal invitation in the mail. The thick cream cardstock with gold foil lettering felt like a mockery of the strained relationship it represented. I RSVP'd yes immediately, still hoping that the actual ceremony might somehow bridge the growing gap between us. On the wedding weekend, I flew to California alone. The hotel Stephanie had selected for guests cost $400 per night, but I couldn't afford to stay there for the 3-night minimum. Instead, I found a modest hotel 20 minutes away for one-third the price and arranged for rideshare transportation. The morning of the wedding, I dressed carefully in the pale blue dress I'd purchased months earlier, before things had deteriorated so badly. I styled my hair, applied my makeup, and tried to prepare emotionally for what would undoubtedly be a difficult day. I tucked the card containing my gift check into my purse and headed to the venue. The winery estate was breathtaking with rolling vineyards and a historic stone building adorned with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers. As I entered the ceremony area, a coordinator directed me to my seat in the front row, though notably on the far edge away from the center. When Stephanie appeared in her gown, a custom designer creation that must have cost as much as a small car, she looked stunningly beautiful. My eyes filled with tears, both of pride and sadness at how distant we'd become. Though she walked right past me on her father's side of the aisle, she didn't meet my gaze. Throughout the ceremony, I maintained my composure, smiling and celebrating outwardly while nursing an ache in my heart. When Thomas and Stephanie were pronounced husband and wife, I cheered along with everyone else, genuinely hoping they would find happiness together. At the reception, I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives of Thomas's family, who clearly had no idea who I was. When I approached Stephanie to congratulate her, her smile remained fixed as she said, "Thanks for coming," before quickly turning to greet other guests she deemed more important. Thomas's parents, Gerald and Patricia, stopped by my table briefly. Their greeting was civil but strained. "Alice," Patricia said, air-kissing near my cheeks. "Such a lovely ceremony, don't you think?" "Beautiful," I agreed. "Stephanie looks radiant." Gerald nodded stiffly. We wanted to make sure Thomas and Stephanie had everything they could possibly want. That's what parents do after all. The implication hung in the air between us, and I bit back a retort about financial responsibility. This wasn't the time or place. As the evening progressed, I observed the excessive luxury surrounding me: the champagne fountain, the caviar station, the live band flown in from New York City, the custom-made ice sculpture, the fireworks display. Each element represented thousands of dollars that would be enjoyed for mere hours, then forgotten. While waiting at the bar for a glass of wine, I overheard Stephanie talking to her bridesmaids. "Can you believe my mom only contributed $15,000? Thomas's parents covered practically everything. So embarrassing." "That's so cheap," one friend replied. "Doesn't she know how important this day is?" I slipped away before they noticed me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Later, when the time came to give my gift, Stephanie barely glanced at the envelope before handing it to an attendant collecting presents. "This is from my mother," she said flatly, without even a thank you. I left the wedding early before the late-night festivities began. No one seemed to notice my departure. Back in my hotel room, I cried for the relationship that seemed irreparably damaged over money and appearances. In the weeks after the wedding, Stephanie barely acknowledged my existence. My texts asking about their honeymoon received cursory responses. My requests to see Noah were met with excuses about their busy schedule. The few times I did see my grandson, the visits were short and supervised, with Stephanie watching my every move, as if I might somehow influence Noah negatively. 3 months after the wedding, I received a formal message from Stephanie. "Mum, I need space from our relationship. Your selfishness around my wedding showed me your true priorities. Please don't contact me for a while. I'll let you know when and if I'm ready to speak again." She blocked me on all social media platforms and stopped responding to my calls or texts. The only glimpses I had of my grandson came from photos occasionally posted by Thomas's parents online. My heart broke anew each day, not just for the loss of my relationship with my daughter, but for the precious moments with Noah I was missing. His 4th birthday came and went without me. The holidays approached with no invitation to share them. I sent gifts for Noah that received no acknowledgement. I felt as though I was grieving while Stephanie was still alive, a particular kind of pain that had no resolution, no closure, and no end in sight. 2 months of silence stretched between us like a vast desert. I threw myself into volunteer work at the hospital, where I'd once been employed, trying to fill the Stephanie and Noah shaped hole in my heart. I joined a support group for estranged parents, finding solace in sharing stories with others who understood this unique pain. Still, every night I looked at photos of my grandson and daughter, wondering if our relationship could ever be repaired. One Tuesday afternoon in November, my phone chimed with a text message. I nearly dropped it when I saw Stephanie's name on the screen. Mum, I think it's time we talked. Thomas and I have been doing some thinking and we'd like to try to repair our relationship. Can you come to dinner this Friday at 7? We're in our new house now. My hands trembled as I read and reread the message. Hope bloomed in my chest, the first I'd felt in months. I texted back immediately, accepting the invitation and expressing my excitement about reconciliation. Stephanie's response was brief but promising. Great. We'll see you then. Noah's excited to see his grandma. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I shopped for gifts, educational toys for Noah, a houseplant for Stephanie and Thomas's new home. I had my hair trimmed, bought a new blouse, rehearsed what I might say. I wanted everything to be perfect for this fresh start. Friday evening arrived and I drove to the address Stephanie had provided, a large colonial in an upscale neighborhood that must have cost at least $1 million. I noted several cars in the driveway and on the street, which seemed odd for what I thought would be an intimate family dinner. Perhaps Thomas's parents were there too, I reasoned. Stephanie answered the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mum, you're here. Come in. She accepted my hug stiffly before leading me into a formal living room where 3 people I'd never met sat on expensive leather sofas. Thomas stood near the fireplace, looking uncomfortable. Mum, these are our friends, Daniel, Robert, and Judith, Stephanie said, gesturing to the strangers. All 3 were dressed in business attire, despite this supposedly being a casual dinner. It's nice to meet you all, I said, confused but determined to be polite. Dinner was a strange affair. The conversation revolved mostly around my retirement, with these friends asking pointed questions about my savings investments, health insurance, and future plans. I answered vaguely, increasingly uneasy about the direction of the discussion. So, Alice, said Daniel, cutting into his steak, do you have long-term care insurance? Those nursing homes can cost a fortune. I have some coverage, I replied cautiously. I've planned carefully for my future. And your house is paid off, right? Judith asked. Stephanie mentioned you've been there since she was a child. Yes, we paid off the mortgage 5 years ago, I answered, wondering why these strangers were so interested in my financial situation. Throughout dinner, Noah appeared only briefly. Stephanie brought him in to give me a quick hug before whisking him away again, saying it was past his bedtime at 6:30. Scare. I caught a glimpse of his disappointed face as he was led upstairs, and my heart ached. After dessert, Thomas cleared his throat. Mum, why don't we move to the study to talk about what we wanted to discuss with you? In the wood-panelled study, the atmosphere shifted from uncomfortably formal to downright intimidating. Daniel, Robert, and Judith arranged themselves behind the desk, pulling out folders and documents. Alice, Daniel began, I should properly introduce myself. I'm Daniel Hargrove, an attorney specializing in estate planning. These are my colleagues, Robert Chen and Judith Patel. My stomach dropped. Attorneys? Why were there attorneys at what was supposed to be a family reconciliation? Stephanie stepped forward, a determined look on her face. Mum, we're concerned about your future. You're getting older, and we want to make sure your finances are properly managed. My finances are just fine, I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I've always been careful with money, as you know. Well, we think it would be best if you signed this, Stephanie said, as Daniel slid a thick document across the desk toward me. It's a power of attorney giving me oversight of your financial decisions. I stared at the document in disbelief. You want control of my money? This isn't about reconciliation at all, is it? Stephanie's expression hardened. It's about being practical. You're not getting any younger, and frankly, your judgment hasn't been the best. Remember how you almost got scammed by that phone call last year? That scam had been a legitimate charity I'd researched thoroughly before donating a modest sum. I'd explained this to Stephanie at the time, but she'd clearly filed it away as evidence of my supposed incompetence. I took a deep breath. I appreciate the concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Stephanie's face flushed with anger. Either you sign this tonight or you'll never see Noah grow up, she said, her voice cold and unfamiliar. It's your choice. Be reasonable about this, or be cut out of our lives for good. The room seemed to spin around me. My own daughter was threatening to keep my grandson from me unless I handed over control of my life savings. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity what Stephanie had become. Someone willing to use a child as a pawn in a game of financial manipulation. I felt an odd calm descend over me as I reached for my purse. I'd like to make a quick phone call before I sign anything, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Stephanie exchanged triumphant glances with the attorneys. Fine, go ahead. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd programmed just in case. Laura. It's Alice. Remember that situation we discussed? I'm at Stephanie's house now. Yes, that's right. Could you come to the address I texted you earlier? Thank you. I hung up and smiled at the confused faces around me. I'll look these documents over while we wait, I said calmly. My attorney should be here in about 20 minutes. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Stephanie's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of uncertainty. Your attorney. What are you talking about? She demanded. Laura Goldstein, my personal attorney, I replied deliberately, keeping my voice even. I've been consulting with her since you blocked me after the wedding. Something told me I might need legal advice sooner rather than later. I began carefully reading through the power of attorney documents, noting with growing alarm how comprehensive they were. The papers would grant Stephanie complete control over my bank accounts, investments, property, and even medical decisions, despite the fact that I was in perfect health and of completely sound mind. This document would give you authority to sell my house without my consent, I noted, looking up at Stephanie, and to make withdrawals from my accounts for reasonable expenses that aren't defined anywhere. Did you really think I would sign this? Daniel cleared his throat uncomfortably. These are fairly standard provisions in a durable power of attorney. Perhaps, I replied, but they're typically used when someone is incapacitated or unable to manage their own affairs. I'm 58 in excellent health and have managed my finances successfully for decades. Thomas had moved to the corner of the room, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Stephanie remained defiant, though I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. You're overreacting, she insisted. This is for your own protection. We're just trying to help you. By threatening to keep my grandson from me unless I sign, I asked quietly. That doesn't sound like help. It sounds like coercion. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Thomas hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Laura, my attorney. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that had made her my choice when I decided I needed legal protection. Good evening, she said, surveying the room with practiced eyes. I'm Laura Goldstein, Alice's attorney. I understand there are some documents being presented tonight. Daniel stood, extending his hand. Daniel Hargrove. These are my colleagues Robert Chen and Judith Patel. We're simply helping the family with some estate planning. Estate planning that involves 3 attorneys ambushing my client at what she was told would be a family reconciliation dinner, Laura asked pointedly. She turned to me. Alice, have you been informed of your right to independent legal review of these documents? Have you been given time to consider them without pressure? No, I replied. I was presented with these papers tonight and told that if I didn't sign them immediately, I would never see my grandson again. Laura's expression hardened. That's extremely troubling. It sounds like undue influence and coercion which would invalidate any document even if signed. Stephanie jumped in. That's not what happened. We're just trying to protect my mother's assets for her future care. Then why the ultimatum about my grandson? I asked. And why the secrecy? Why present this as a reconciliation when it's clearly an ambush? I reached into my purse again and pulled out my phone. By the way, I should mention that I've been recording this entire conversation since I arrived. I hadn't actually started recording until we entered the study, but they didn't need to know that detail. The effect was immediate. Daniel and his colleagues exchanged alarmed glances. Judith began gathering up papers, while Robert whispered something urgently to Daniel. Recording without consent could be illegal depending on the state, Daniel began. But Laura cut him off. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recordings counselor. As long as Alice was part of the conversation, she's within her rights. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Thomas, looking increasingly distressed, went to answer it. He returned with 2 more unexpected guests, his parents Gerald and Patricia Wilson. What are you doing here? Stephanie asked, her composure cracking for the first time. Alice called us this afternoon, Gerald said gravely. She told us you had invited her to dinner, and that she suspected something wasn't right. We decided to come and see for ourselves. Patricia looked around the room, taking in the attorneys and scattered legal documents. What's happening here, Stephanie Thomas? Thomas finally found his voice. Stephanie thought it would be best if her mother signed over power of attorney, for her own protection. And these attorneys? Gerald asked, nodding toward Daniel and his colleagues. They're here to facilitate the process, Stephanie said defensively. Patricia's expression darkened. It looks more like intimidation than facilitation to me. I had called Thomas's parents not just for backup, but because I genuinely believed they needed to know what their son and daughter-in-law were doing. Despite our differences around the wedding, they had always seemed like fundamentally decent people who valued family. I didn't want to believe what Alice told us, Gerald said, his voice heavy with disappointment. But it appears she was right to be concerned. Daniel cleared his throat again. Given the circumstances, perhaps we should conclude our business another time. He and his colleagues gathered their papers and made a hasty exit, nodding awkwardly to everyone as they left. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, I heard small footsteps on the stairs. Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Grandma," he said, spotting me. "You came back." Before anyone could stop him, he ran across the room and threw himself into my arms. I hugged him tightly, tears springing to my eyes. "I missed you so much, sweetheart," I whispered. "I missed you too," he said. "Mummy said you were too busy to visit me." Those innocent words hung in the air, indicting Stephanie more effectively than any accusation I could have made. With Noah nestled in my arms, the room fell into a tense silence. Stephanie stood frozen, her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her. Thomas moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder that she immediately shrugged off. "Noah, sweetheart," Patricia said gently. Why don't you show me that new train set in your playroom? Grandpa Gerald can come too. Noah looked up at me. Will you still be here when I come back, Grandma Alice? I promise I'm not going anywhere, I assured him, brushing his hair from his forehead. Once Noah had left with Thomas's parents, I turned to face my daughter. The anger I'd expected to feel had transformed into something more complex, a deep sadness tinged with resolution. Stephanie, I began, keeping my voice level, I want you to understand something. I've never been more disappointed than I am right now, but I still love you. You're my daughter, and that will never change. But what you've tried to do tonight is not only wrong, it's potentially criminal. You don't understand, Stephanie insisted, though her voice had lost its earlier conviction. We're just trying to make sure your money is protected. Protected for whom? Laura asked pointedly. These documents would give Stephanie complete control of your assets, Alice. She could liquidate everything tomorrow if she wanted to. Thomas stepped forward, his face etched with shame. This has gone too far, he said quietly. Steph, we should never have done this. Shut up, Thomas, Stephanie snapped. Don't you dare back out now. Your husband is right, I said. This has gone too far. Using my grandson as leverage to try to gain control of my finances is beyond unacceptable. What exactly did you think would happen here? Laura asked. That Alice wouldn't read what she was signing? That she wouldn't consult anyone else? That she would simply hand over her life's saving because you threatened to keep her grandson from her? Stephanie's composure finally broke. You don't understand. We have the mortgage on the new house, the country club membership fees, Noah's private school tuition. Do you know how expensive everything is? And you're just sitting on all that money, doing nothing with it. The truth emerged at last. This wasn't about protecting me or managing my affairs. It was about accessing my retirement savings to fund their extravagant lifestyle. That money represents 30 years of hard work, I said quietly. Nights, weekends, holidays, spent caring for others while you were growing up. It's meant to support me through what could be 20 or 30 more years of life. Gerald and Patricia returned to the room, having settled Noah with a movie upstairs. I think we all need to have an honest conversation, Gerald said firmly. What we've witnessed tonight is unconscionable. Dad, you don't understand, Thomas began, but Gerald cut him off. I understand perfectly well, son. You and Stephanie have been living beyond your means, and you saw Alice's savings as a solution to your financial problems. Patricia looked at Stephanie with a mixture of disappointment and concern. We raised Thomas to respect others, especially family. This scheme goes against everything we believe in. It wasn't a scheme, Stephanie protested weakly. We were concerned about Mum's future. Stop it, Stephanie, I said, my patience finally exhausted. At least have the courage to be honest about what you were trying to do. Something in my tone finally reached her. She sank into a chair, her defenses crumbling. Everything's so expensive, she whispered. The house, the cars, Noah's school. We're drowning in debt. And you have all this money just sitting there. Money I earned that I need for my own future, I reminded her. Did you ever consider simply asking for help or adjusting your lifestyle to match your income? Thomas sat beside Stephanie, his expression somber. I've been saying we need to scale back for months. The country club membership alone is $40,000 a year. $40,000, I repeated, stunned. That's more than I lived on for entire years while raising you, Stephanie. Gerald cleared his throat. Patricia and I are partly to blame. We've enabled some of this behavior by helping with the wedding and the house down payment. But we thought you were managing the rest responsibly. We weren't, Thomas admitted. We're nearly $300,000 in debt, not counting the mortgage. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My daughter and son-in-law had been living a lie, maintaining an appearance of wealth, while sinking deeper into financial trouble. I looked at Laura, who had been quietly taking notes. "I think I need to be very clear about several things," I said. "First, I will not be signing any power of attorney or other financial documents tonight, or in the foreseeable future. Second, I want regular, unimpeded access to my grandson without threats or manipulation. Third, I'm willing to help Stephanie and Thomas address their financial situation, but only through proper financial counseling and with clear boundaries." Laura nodded. "I think those terms are reasonable given the circumstances. I would suggest family counseling as well." "I agree," Patricia said firmly. "This family needs healing, and it needs to start with honesty and accountability." Noah's voice called from upstairs, asking for a glass of water. Stephanie remained frozen, so I stood up. "I'll go," I said. "If that's all right." No one objected as I climbed the stairs to tend to my grandson. As I sat beside him, helping him sip water and smoothing his blanket, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and hope. The relationship with my daughter was badly damaged, perhaps beyond full repair, but at least everything was now in the open. We could begin to address the real issues instead of the manufactured ones Stephanie had used to justify her scheme. "Will you come see me again soon, Grandma?" Noah asked sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart," I promised. Very soon, and many times after that. I kissed his forehead and turned off his bedside lamp, praying that this promise was one I would be able to keep. In the days following that explosive dinner, our family entered uncharted territory. The morning after, I received a text from Thomas, not Stephanie, asking if we could meet for coffee. He arrived at the cafe looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. "I want to apologize," he said immediately. "What we tried to do was wrong on every level. I knew it wasn't right, but I went along with it anyway." "Why?" I asked simply. He stared into his coffee. "Fear, mostly. Our finances are a disaster, and Stephanie kept saying you had all this money you weren't using. It started with the wedding and just spiraled from there." "Where is Stephanie now?" "At her parents' house with Noah. She couldn't face you yet." He hesitated. "She's angry and embarrassed, but also scared. We really are in serious financial trouble." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Thomas. It's a start." We talked for nearly 2 hours. He detailed their financial situation. The mortgage they couldn't afford, credit card debt accumulated from luxury purchases, car payments, country club dues, expensive vacations. The picture that emerged was of two people who had built their life on appearance rather than substance. "I'd like to help," I said finally, "but not by handing over my retirement savings. You and Stephanie need professional financial counseling, a realistic budget, and probably some lifestyle adjustments." Thomas nodded. Gerald and Patricia said the same thing. They're willing to help too, but only if we agree to financial counseling and full transparency. "And what about Noah? I need to know I'll be able to see my grandson regularly without conditions." "Of course," Thomas said immediately. "That should never have been threatened. Never." That conversation marked the beginning of a long, difficult healing process. Gerald and Patricia proved to be unexpected allies, arranging for family counseling sessions that began the following week. Stephanie attended reluctantly at first, barely making eye contact with me. During that first session, our therapist, Dr. Marshall, asked each of us to express our feelings honestly but constructively. "I feel betrayed," I said when my turn came. "Not just by the attempt to take control of my finances, but by the willingness to use Noah as leverage. That crossed a line I never imagined my daughter would cross." Stephanie sat rigid in her chair, tears streaming down her face. When prompted to respond, she could barely speak. I was desperate, she finally managed. We're drowning in debt, and all I could think about was this easy solution. I know it was wrong. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing that we could potentially build upon. Over the next few months, regular therapy sessions helped us navigate the complicated emotions surrounding what had happened. Stephanie gradually revealed that her obsession with wealth and status stemmed partly from insecurities that had taken root after her father died. I watched you struggle so hard after Dad died, she admitted during our fourth session. Working all those extra shifts, pinching pennies, looking so tired all the time. I swore I'd never live that way. I wanted security, luxury, everything we couldn't have. But we had what mattered, I reminded her gently. We had a roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. Those late nights I worked weren't just about money. They were about creating a future for you. Parallel to our emotional work, Stephanie and Thomas began serious financial counseling. They sold their oversized house and moved to a smaller, more affordable home. They surrendered the luxury cars for modest vehicles, withdrew from the country club, and began the long process of debt reduction. It was a painful adjustment for them, especially Stephanie, but a necessary one. My relationship with Noah flourished once the barriers were removed. I now had regular visits with him, including occasional weekends at my house. Each moment with him was precious, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. 6 months after that fateful dinner, I noticed significant changes in Stephanie's priorities. The designer clothes had been replaced with more practical attire. She spoke less about material possessions and more about experiences with Noah. When her friend invited her on an expensive spa weekend, she declined, saying she preferred to spend that money on Noah's education fund instead. For my part, I established clear boundaries about money and relationships. I helped Stephanie and Thomas in practical ways, babysitting Noah, cooking meals for their freezer, teaching Stephanie budget-friendly recipes my mother had taught me. But I was firm about my financial limits, making it clear that my retirement savings were not available for their discretionary spending. My relationship with Thomas's parents also evolved in unexpected ways. Gerald and Patricia had initially seemed judgmental of my more modest means, but after the power of attorney incident, they gained a new respect for my financial prudence. We occasionally met for lunch, without Stephanie and Thomas finding common ground in our love for our grandson and our desire to help the young couple build a more stable life. 1 year after the confrontation, our family gathered for Noah's 5th birthday. It was a simple celebration in a local park, a stark contrast to the extravagant party Stephanie had thrown the previous year. Noah didn't seem to notice the difference, laughing joyfully as he played with friends and opened modest but thoughtful gifts. As I watched Stephanie interact with other parents, no longer trying to impress with tales of expensive vacations or designer purchases, I felt a cautious optimism. The daughter I'd raised was still in there beneath the materialistic veneer she'd adopted. During a quiet moment, Stephanie sat beside me on a park bench. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately," she said unexpectedly. "Oh," I responded, surprised by the mention of Frank. "He would have hated what I became," she said softly. "All those things I thought were so important, the big house, the fancy car, the expensive clothes, none of it would have mattered to him." "No, it wouldn't have," I agreed. "Your father valued relationships over possessions. Always." "I'm trying to be more like that," she admitted. "It's hard sometimes. I still get envious when I see my old friends posting about their vacations or new homes. But then I look at Noah and at the family we're rebuilding, and I think maybe I'm finally getting my priorities straight." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Trust once broken doesn't heal overnight. Our relationship remained a work in progress, with occasional setbacks and difficult conversations. But the foundation was stronger now, built on honesty rather than appearances. The greatest lesson I learned through this ordeal was about the courage to protect both love and boundaries. I could love my daughter unconditionally while still refusing to enable harmful behavior. I could forgive the betrayal without forgetting the lesson it taught me. And I could stand firm in my own truth while leaving room for reconciliation. As Noah climbed into my lap with a storybook asking me to read to him for the third time that day, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for material wealth or status symbols, but for second chances for healing and for the wisdom that comes from navigating life's most painful challenges. "Grandma," Noah asked, looking up at me with Frank's eyes, "are you happy now?" I hugged him close, my heart full. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm very happy now." And in that moment, surrounded by the imperfect but healing family we were rebuilding, I truly was. Have you ever had to stand firm on a boundary with family, even when it was painful? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is say no to someone you love, especially when they're using emotional manipulation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family relationships and the courage it takes to maintain healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story today. And remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the authentic connections we build with those we love.